Hello, this is Hugh from QLC. Welcome back. Is pedophilia a sexual orientation? A short answer, of course not. Unfortunately, other people disagree. So I've been reading different sources of media. I've been reading a Harvard Medical School article, public health letter, something like that. Somebody decided to write that they believe that pedophilia is a sexual orientation. They put some statistics in there. They got some studies in there. They got some figures in there to fool people into believing that this mental disorder is just like any other sexual orientation. And then to add insult to injury, all you have to do is go onto the YouTube, and you can find a couple of TED talks from different women talking about how they believe that pedophilia is a sexual orientation. Now, if you look at the medical article and if you look at the TED talks, in a nutshell, they're talking about how just because there are pedophiles and there's child abuse victims, it doesn't mean that every single person who is a perpetrator of child abuse is a pedophile, and it doesn't mean that every single pedophile is a child abuser, because a lot of the pedophiles don't actually physically abuse children, and or they say that a lot of pedophiles don't commit crimes related to pedophilia. So because of that, they think that we should normalize pedophilia, and we should make it a sexual orientation so that pedophiles can get help instead of being prosecuted for being pedophiles. Now, I'm all about helping people who are sick and helping people that are in need. But pedophilia is a mental disorder. I don't know why these extreme liberals are going out of their way to try and normalize something that is disgusting. Now, it's disgusting being a pedophile. Um, that's one thing. But obviously, if you're not doing anything to act on it, then there's an argument to be made that you're not causing anybody any harm. However, it however, you if they're normalizing pedophilia, I fear that they're not just going to normalize pedophilia when it comes to people that don't do anything about their pedophilic interests, but they'll also normalize it when it comes to people that actually do act out on it inadvertently. And I say inadvertently as in these lefties, these extreme liberals will inadvertently normalize pedophilia um, that is acted on by people that abuse children or end up abusing kids. Now, they can go ahead and talk about how a lot of the people that are pedophiles have jobs or have families, or they don't look like they have psychological disorders, so it's fine, they should just seek help. But you have to understand that, this topic is a slippery slope, because if you look at the Harvard Medical School article, it talks about how there are different treatments for such a thing, such as drug therapy using SSRIs or psychotherapy. And even with the psychotherapy, it says that the effects are short term, not long term. And the drug therapy, well, who's to say if that works? I read the article, but it didn't really give me much of, it didn't give me much confidence that the drug therapy would work either. Now, with the TED Talks, in one TED Talk, which is still on the TEDx YouTube page, there's a lady called Madeleine, and she talks about how she's a psychologist and how she's worked with police and everything. She's Dutch. She's talking about how sexual orientation, uh, should, well, that pedophilia is a sexual orientation, and we should treat it as such. She talks about how lonely it must be to love someone and never be able to act on it because of how society thinks. Now, obviously, when people make such arguments in the real world, they're normally talking about homosexuality or being bisexual or being a trans person, um, wanting to love somebody as yourself and then falling in love with another trans person, or being a trans person and falling for somebody that isn't trans, or being someone that isn't trans and falling in love with a trans person, whatever. But those are actual um, sexual orientations or gender identities if we're talking about being trans or being transgender, I should say. But pedophilia has nothing to do with sexual orientation. Yes, there's a sexual preference for kids, but I don't believe that we should call it a sexual orientation because A, it's legal, B, it's moral. C, children have the risk of being harmed or abused by these pedophiles who are normally grown men. And D, we shouldn't call it a sexual. You shouldn't call it a sexual orientation because you have to factor in the fact that children cannot consent to sex. Children cannot consent to any sexual act until they are of legal age. Legal age, of course, depends on which country you're in. There are countries where the age of consent is 13. There's one country that's even uh, got the age of consent that's 11. But obviously, you have to think about the fact that uh, in a lot of countries, age of consent is like 16 or 18. Um, and even in those countries, you have to be very careful because a lot of kids, you know, are not sexually experienced. But it's not just about that. It's also about the fact that they're not able to consent. That's why we have legal age limits. So you've got all these people going on TED talks and talking about how it's okay to normalize pedophilia. But I don't agree with this. I don't agree with this at all. Like one lady in a TED talk, her name is Mirjam. She was doing her TED talk at a university in Germany, and she was talking about this guy called Jonas and how he was self-isolating because he didn't have he couldn't tell his friends that he was a pedophile. He couldn't tell his friends that if he went to the beach, he'd be getting turned on by kids in swimsuits. And then he ended up being a child abuser, and then that led to disaster because obviously, you know, he got punished. Whatever happened to him, who cares? So this young lady called Mirjam, she's talking about how people like Jonas, we shouldn't prosecute them, we shouldn't harm them or punish them, we should give them treatment, we should protect them. And then in the other TED talk, there was a lady called Madeleine, and she was talking about how um, prosecuting them is the last defense. Now, today they're talking about finding alternatives to prosecution, but this is just the first step in normalizing something that is very disgusting. Because again, children can't consent, children are vulnerable, children are, you know, they don't know much about adult manners such as sex. They should not be anywhere near an adult that's willing to engage in sex with them. So I personally believe that there's nothing more to say about that. They shouldn't even promote the idea of normalizing pedophilia and calling it a sexual orientation, because something I almost forgot to say, if you call it a sexual orientation, like, what's a sexual orientation? Being heterosexual, being homosexual, being bisexual. Those are examples, not the only examples, but those are examples of being of a sexual orientation. You can't call pedophilia a sexual orientation because, being bisexual, being homosexual, being heterosexual, yeah, you have consensual sex with people that you prefer to sleep with. If you're straight, you want to sleep with people of the opposite sex. If you're gay, you want to sleep with people of the same sex. If you're bisexual, you want to sleep with people of either sex. I say either sex, male or female, I mean. But pedophilia is wanting to sleep with kids, wanting to do sexual or romantic stuff with kids. That is wrong because kids can't consent. That is the bottom line. I don't know what these people are doing, giving interesting people a platform to talk about how disgusting things should be normalized and treated like just another, inconvenience. It's not an inconvenience. If you want to treat people for being pedophiles because it's a disease, that I can get behind. That anyone can get behind. But that's because pedophilia is a disease. It is not, and I repeat, not a flipping sexual orientation. And I think earlier I said sexual preference. Even then, I shouldn't have said that. They prefer to sleep with kids. That's what I mean by sexual preference. I don't believe that you should class pedophilia as a sexual orientation like you would being straight, being gay, or being bisexual. Thank you for your time. It's you from QLC. Follow my work, like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thank you. Goodbye.